We're going to get started. So welcome to all of you in person and to our audience online. Today's session is part of Wellesley College's Albright Institute's Wintersession, which is a cornerstone of the Albright Institute Fellows experience. I'm Miranda Daniloff-Mancusi, and I'm the Executive Director of the new Wagner Centers for Wellesley in the World. The Wagner Centers is an umbrella to foster targeted convenings and conversations and collaboration to bring the world into Wellesley and Wellesley into the world in impactful ways. The Albright Institute, which honors our first female Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, is one of the key institutes of the Wagner Centers. I am really delighted today to introduce our interviewer and our speaker, and I can guarantee that you are in for a treat of a conversation. The questions that academics and researchers are exploring and probing can inform decisions that policymakers and leaders are making that has impact in the real world and on real lives. And the problems that leaders and policymakers are tackling can inform the questions that researchers take up and what teachers teach the next generation of leaders, such as the talented Albright Fellows who are in this room today. First, let me introduce our moderator. Professor Jay Turner is the William R. Kenan Jr. Professor of Environmental Studies here at Wellesley College. Professor Turner is an expert and a researcher on the recent history of U.S. environmental politics and policies, including climate change, the clean energy transition, and public lands management. His most recent book is Charged, A History of Batteries and Lessons for a Clean Energy Future. And at the end of the book, Professor Turner calls for domestic policy to support investments in the clean energy supply chain and specifically in batteries. And speaking of policies for the clean energy future, our guest today has significantly moved the policy needle and is one of the nation's most respected voices on climate change, the environment, and public health. Gina McCarthy is a former U.S. EPA Administrator, and she was the first White House National Climate Advisor. She led the Climate Policy Office under President Biden, which led the most aggressive action on climate in the U.S., creating unprecedented clean energy innovation and those investments that Professor Turner has commented on. Her commitment to bold action across the Biden administration, supported by the climate and clean energy provisions in the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, restored U.S. climate leadership on a global stage and put a new U.S. national target to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 50 to 52% below 2005 levels by 2030, within our reach. Gina is also a senior advisor at Bloomberg Philanthropies, the managing co-chair of America is All In Coalition, and a senior fellow at the Fletcher School's Climate Policy Lab at Tufts University. So let me now turn this over to Professor Jay Turner.
Miranda, thank you for the introduction, and to the Albright Institute for hosting this dialogue, and all of you all for being here, both in person and the folks who are joining us on the live stream. So Gina, thank you for being here. I have really, I guess in 2006, I just started at Wellesley. I went to the Massachusetts Climate Action Network, and you were there giving a keynote address. And I listened to this address, and I said, wow, she's going somewhere. She's really good. And it's been really exciting the last 2 decades to watch your career develop. And just really nice to have you here with us at Wellesley.
Thank you.
Yeah, so, there's a lot we could talk about. And this is a pivotal moment, right? So much has been accomplished recently, but looking ahead, the challenges seem as great as they ever have been. And just, thinking a little bit about your career, you got started at the local level working on public health in Canton. You worked at the state level in Massachusetts with a Republican governor, among others, and in Connecticut, and most recently working at the federal level. And we mentioned the Biden administration and your position as National Climate Advisor, but also as the administrator for the Environmental Protection Agency for the second term of the Obama administration. So yeah, lots to talk about.
I've been busy.
Yeah, you've been busy.
Yeah.
But I really, at this moment, kind of coming off of 4 really important years of the Biden administration, I think this is a moment, right? Thinking about the future of climate action to take stock of what we can learn from both the successes and challenges of the last couple of years. So you said you wouldn't come on board Biden's climate team unless he reframed and took a broad approach to climate change, focusing on it as a social justice issue as well as a public health issue. And in my mind, that approach, which really resonates here at Wellesley, played an important role in building a broader coalition for climate action. Yet at the same time, the partisanship has just gotten deeper.
Really?
So, right. So would you agree? But I guess, given that, what lessons do you think climate advocates should take from the Biden administration?
Well, Jay, first of all, thanks for joining in this and for all the work that you're doing. And Miranda, I love you, and I'm so happy that you're here. I think it's a great fit for the way in which you really are quite a compassionate individual, and I think being here is a really good fit for the work you're doing. Thank God. I mean, if I thought it sucked, I'd let you know that too. But I don't. I think it's great. And of course, Miranda was the one who asked if I would do this, and I would always do whatever she asked me. But it's been a great opportunity, and let me rephrase really the question you asked me, if I can still remember it. Basically, I was approached early on to see if I wanted to rejoin an administration after spending 6 years in the Obama EPA. And I loved that job. It was great. But frankly, I wasn't all that keen about going back again. And so it wasn't that, I had to get my arm twisted, but, when you get a call from the President of the United States and he asks you to do something, I didn't say, yeah, here's a bunch of conditions for what I want to do. You just either say yes or you hang up really quickly and pretend you never got the call, which I thought about. But the challenge that I had was I was working for Natural Resources Defense Council, which is a very large and very successful, frankly, organization, environmental organization. And I was the president of NRDC and the CEO. And joining that was exciting to me because it was different. Because I had spent, almost 40 years in government, all told more than that. And I wanted, I joined NRDC for a couple of reasons. One, I really liked them, and they asked me. But number 2 was because I made money for the first time in my life. Public service is wonderful. It doesn't pay a lot. So you got to get over that and see the richness of what you get when you do public service. But the reason I'm raising this is that I was less than a year into that job when people started to ask me if I wanted to come back. And I didn't make, qualified, outline qualifications for why. But I also tried like hell not to say yes. Because my husband was giving me the evil eye all the time about, Gina, you're finally making some money. I convinced him to quit his job because it was aggravating him, and I thought it'd be really fun, and we were having, our grandchildren were getting born, and he was all excited. So I convinced him to quit, and then I started getting these calls. Now, the reason why, what flipped it and made me have to do this, even though he didn't speak to me for a few weeks, Unfortunately, he does now. But the reason I changed was the framing that Joe Biden brought to me on that phone call. He basically said, you know, you and I know that climate is a big deal. There's no question. And I knew him when he was vice president. I spent a lot of time with him. I love Joe Biden. I love him even more now than what I did before. But he said, Gina, we have to frame this in a way that gets people out of the COVID situation and into a more positive framing. He said, it can't be how many greenhouse gas emissions we're counting. It has to be, how do you turn this into the biggest opportunity of a lifetime for us to work together to figure out how you grow jobs, how you make investments, grab the private sector and run with it. How do you allow people to feel like this is a moment in time when they can save money on their electricity bills, when we can rebuild our job, you know, capacity in the United States, which had withered. So it was all those things that I had to say yes, because the one thing that has driven me crazy in this climate battle is how infrequently people talked about it in that type of framing, as a human issue. All we talked about was atmospheric greenhouse gas emissions, which frankly nobody gives a damn about. They care about all the things that was hurting, and we never articulated it in a personal framing. And it's driven me crazy for years, because I keep telling people, you know, this is about human beings. This is about our health, our security, our safety. This isn't just about controlling the planet. And so it was that led me to say yes, and frankly, it turned out to be an incredible gift for me, and a wonderful opportunity.
And a lot's happened in the last 4 years. And you know, hearing you talk about opportunity and framing climate in terms of public health, and not just in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, I mean, that all makes so much sense. And we've seen good policy come of that.
Yeah.
Right? Because I'm thinking about the politics, right? Because we would also think, right, that would be the foundation for building a broader coalition, a stronger, more durable coalition that would change political outcomes to drive more support for climate. And given what's happening in 2 weeks in Washington with a turn in administration, you know, the political side of this, right, doesn't seem to have worked out the way folks would have wanted it to, right? When you were talking
Well,
about
me personally, no, it hasn't worked out well.
So let me sharpen this question a little bit, because you're talking about jobs and opportunities, and
Yeah.
you know, some scholars have argued that Democrats really need to embrace a form of kind of new, quote, green economic populism. And in their view, you know, they're saying, well, you know, the Biden administration, right, has made jobs, but it's been about mobilizing private industry and putting into place policies that, you know, favored more affluent consumers, you know, who can afford electric vehicles. And at the same time, right, climate change is, you know, driving people's, you know, energy costs up. The price of home insurance is going through the roof, right? You know, the things that make a difference in people's pocketbooks every day. And, you know, so they're, you know, arguing that, you know, climate activists need to, and policymakers need to be making changes that, you know, make immediate impacts on the working class at the same time that it advances this kind of long-term opportunity-based approach to climate, which in some ways sounds like what the Biden administration, what you were trying to do 4 years ago, yet they're saying we need a new green economic populism. So I'm just kind of wondering if you can react to that.
I don't have any idea what a green economic populism is. So I think Wellesley may be fancier than I am in using terms like that. But to me, look, I am an eternal optimist. Now, that's a good thing to be when you're in government a lot, because you weather yeah, that's true. You weather the sort of ebbs and flows of government. I lived through the prior Trump administration. I worked hard. We got past that. And what I still think the opportunity framing is real. I think there's also a tremendous sort of type of populism that's happening, not just in the United States, but internationally, across the world. It's very challenging. And I will admit that it took me a few minutes to get over the result of the election, but it doesn't make me think that there's anything more, that optimism is not correct. Because Trump failed miserably in his first term to actually do anything that made a transition. What the Biden administration did with the bipartisan infrastructure law, the IRA, which, by the way, I never used that term. I shouldn't have, because I'm of Irish descent. I don't like IRA as a term. Who made the name of that up? I will never. I did not.
I was assuming you were there at the
No,
table.
no, I don't know how it happened. But I guess my main point is that I think it's going to be more difficult in the next administration. But the challenge we have is actually just to continue to make clean energy the winner. And I think that's going to continue. I don't have any doubt about that, because it's making too much money for the people that to actually stand aside and let it get destroyed. I just don't see it happening, honestly, Jay. You can see all the change that's happening, and it's just renewable energy is winning hands down, and there's huge amounts of money that are going to Republican districts. The vast majority of IRA money is going to Republican districts, and we've already seen more than 18 Republicans or something writing letters saying we're not going to roll this thing back. So I just think it's taken hold in a way that people will begin to see the changes that they wanted to see before. We just ran out of time. 4 more years would have given us the ability to actually see the change that people are demanding. And I've read a ton of articles, as I'm sure you have, on, why did Trump win? I still don't know the answer definitively to that question, but I think a lot of it is because of the income inequality in this country and elsewhere. You can't continue to have so many billionaires in addition to so many human beings that are just struggling. And I think it's the working class. We lost the working class vote. We lost the Black and Latino vote. And I don't think that has anything to do beyond with, having to do with, just people needing more economic security, needing an idea that we were actually investing in them and their families. And we just didn't have enough time to bring that to the table. And we lost. But that's all I can think of. Yeah. But it's going to be challenging, Jay, as you know, and everybody knows. But I think we'll get through it, and I'm going to work hard to try to make sure that's the case. Of course, I always win, so that's it.
That point about how the infrastructure law, Inflation Reduction Act, with all of the support for clean energy and expanding opportunities to adopt clean energy technologies, the payoff isn't in the first 4 years. It takes longer than that. I think that makes a lot of sense. But taking a step, thinking bigger picture here, just about the durability. So much has happened. So the durability of these different policies that have been put into place, because you have the big laws like the Infrastructure Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. You've got rules that were adopted and put forward, promulgated by the Environmental Protection Agency. So rules to implement a fee on methane, right? For the first time, we actually have a price on methane emissions, or tighter standards for greenhouse gas emissions for automobiles, which will help make vehicles much more efficient. Or, executive actions, right? Just getting back into the Paris Climate Accord, right? That's, something that Biden was able
That's
to
definitely
do.
going to stick, don't you think?
Right. So, or yesterday, right, taking all of the remaining offshore areas of the U.S.
Yeah.
kind of off the table for oil and gas development. But right, so just so much has happened. But I'd be curious to hear you reflect a little bit on the durability of these policies. You're saying some Republicans are supporting the Inflation Reduction Act, many are not, right? But there are other hurdles, right?
They're not saying that they are, clearly. But it's really hard to turn millions of dollars away in your own constituency district. I mean, seriously, that's a tough one. So I'm thinking that you would have to be a little bit blind to sort of reject that kind of funding for your own constituencies. But anyways, was there a punchline on that?
Well, I think the punchline was really just thinking about kind of the broad sweep
Yeah.
of action we've seen
Yeah.
over the last 4 years. Which parts are going to be more durable? So you're saying you think the Inflation Reduction Act will be, but what about the Paris Climate Accord clearly on the
Yeah,
chopping
no,
block for the
yeah,
US,
that's
but,
pretty much gone. But that happened during the prior administration, and the fun thing was, and it's one of the reasons why I'm working at Bloomberg Philanthropies on America is All In, is that it left this space for states and cities to step up, and it was a massive step up. I mean, nobody withered and said, I'm not going to do anything anymore because it's going to happen again. There's stronger and more opportunity for constituency building at the local and state level than there's ever been. And so I'm really bullish on the ability of cities and states to move. Now, that doesn't mean every state governor is going to want to do this stuff, but there's lots of opportunity for good things to happen. So I keep saying I'm not worried about this. I worry every night about all this stuff, but I just can't. I can't see how you could cut off your nose to spite your face in a way that people are suggesting. It's just, I just can't see it. And politics be damned. In the end, you got to get votes for your own. Your constituencies have to vote for you. And that's what's going to drive many of these decisions. I think the challenge that we face, though, that I think is a more sort of, I guess just to say a bigger challenge, is that folks on the Hill, a lot of the folks on the Hill, and the folks that President-elect Trump is trying to put into office in the agencies is quite extreme. It's quite difficult to get your arms around. But EPA survived really well during this sort of past 12-year horizon. The only thing that really ticks me off, and you mentioned this, was EPA and their rulemaking and things, which has been extraordinary. They have moved more rules and regulations forward than I could ever have imagined. But the thing that ticks me off is they did it because they have a ton more money than I ever had when I was at EPA. My budget at EPA at its highest was $8.5 billion. They've spent $2 billion on one fund. I'm like, what the hell? Why didn't I come in at this point in time? I could have been such a hero, man. Instead of I was like penny pinching everything. So it's great that EPA is now really significantly funded. And they've done the Green Climate Fund, which is looking at all of the sort of communities left behind, and they've moved that money out. It's all in those communities' hands. It's staggering the work that got done, and I'm so proud of it. So I had nothing to do with all that work other than try to get the money for it, but it's just been amazing. And part of the challenge also is that, and this goes back to one of, I think, your original premises, which was what's challenging is going to be what's happening with some of the rulemaking, and it's getting to the Supreme Court and some of the most recent decisions of the Supreme Court on things like, rolling back some of the fundamental decisions that have been, for decades, a given at EPA. And that's very disturbing to me
That was helpful.
personally.
I feel like I've got 4 different big topics I now want to follow up on. Maybe just going back one step, I mean, right, given the fact that we're not going to see leadership at the federal level for the next 4 years, cities and states are going to become really important players. And
Yeah.
you've got optimism and around that. I guess when you think about the kinds of actions that we could see at the state and local levels, like what are the models that are out there? Which communities kind of come to mind or states come to mind that you'd like to see kind of scaled up?
There's a lot of things happening at the state level that are kind of interesting. First of all, I mean, everybody looks at California, and they probably should, because they're still doing well, and they're moving aggressively on a number of fronts. Plus, they're so important to international relations and discussions. They're sort of like a country in and of themselves. And I'm really proud of a lot of the work that's been done there. But I mean, take little old Massachusetts, we're doing fine. You know, we've done a lot of work on climate. In fact, one of the most annoying things that happened to me after I left the White House was that I got a call from Governor Healy, who asked me to write her climate plan for her. I'm like, I just left to take a nap for a few weeks. So, I mean, but it was a robust conversation with really good people engaged. And they came out with a plan that had a lot of good things in it. And they're still moving forward. Take little old Vermont. You know, they've decided to take a Superfund approach to looking at how to really advance climate efforts there. There's so many good things coming. You know, I've been working with Governor Inslee in Washington, and I had a great time giving a speech there. It was pretty outrageous, but I won't tell you all the outrageous things I said. But I mean, they have done so much work on climate that it's very gratifying. And I think the reason why I'm so bullish on this is I just think that clean energy has become so much more affordable and so much more of a contrast to the fossil fuel industry that I just think it's cemented and it's going to continue. As long as people pay less on their bills because they have access to clean energy, as long as we can keep supporting it through tax credits and other venues, I think that it's really a given that we're going to win this battle. The problem that I have, and I'm sure you feel the same, Jay, is that, you know, we don't have a whole lot of time to spare to make this right. You know, 4 years of seeing this deteriorate is 4 years too many. And that's what's challenging. And hopefully, I don't worry about young people, I worry about people my age and people with lots of money, which not me, figuring out how they can try to slow this down. And fossil fuel industry has done nothing but try to do that its entire existence.
It would be helpful to have somebody leading the EPA who is going to move this forward. But coming back to one of the topics you had just raised, Lee Zeldin, representative from New York, is the presumed nominee for the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. The League of Conservation Voters grades representatives on how they vote on environmental laws. He scored 14%, so not very good. So he's going to be leading the EPA for the next, at least the beginning of this second Trump administration. I mean, you know, what does that mean for the EPA? We've been through this before, but more specifically, you know, I'm thinking about the people who work for the EPA,
Yeah,
the staffers who are there in DC, around the country, who write all of these regulations. You know, they're the ones who do the heavy lifting behind the scenes and have the expertise. You know, what can we do to support them in the months and years ahead?
The only good news is I think he's better than the people that were during the Trump's first administration going to EPA. At least he has some experience in government. At least I think, he has made some, he's had support for some of the climate efforts in New York, which is kind of interesting. But honestly, if you didn't know anybody that worked for US EPA, you should get to know them. They are such feisty, clever individuals. I mean, when things, I won't say that they purposely drag their butts on things that they were told to do, but clearly they didn't put their sneakers on to try to run fast. And they're very clever and they're very good. And I think the thing that I worry about the most, honestly, is just the overall scheme of the Trump administration, which Trump himself has outlined, to get rid of all of the, basically so much of the workforce there, and to insert people with little or no credibility in those areas to lead those agencies. That's of much greater threat than the first administration was, because they just didn't get it, and it worries me. And when you have external folks like Elon Musk and Vivek, what's his name, Ramaswamy? Seriously, that's the bigger threat, I think, is they may be more clever, more adamant. They may have Trump's, Trump may have learned something from his first exercise. And so I just worry that all they're really going to do is, instead of just undermining regulations that have been done, they're going to ship them to the Supreme Court in a form where they hope the majority of the Supreme Court will make the decisions that they want. And I think we're going to have a rough road on that. But all I know is that EPA has survived for quite a length of time, making good decisions and pushing rules and regulations forward that actually made a difference in people's lives. And I think they're going to still be protecting that, and I know they will, as much as they possibly can.
I hope so. Right. I mean, the first Trump administration took a lot of swings at the EPA, and really it was congressional Republicans that played a key role in saying, no, we're not going to let you take apart this agency. And,
Congress has changed. That's part of the dynamic here. I've never seen stuff like this. And, I've been doing this work for a long time. I worked for 6 governors. 5 of them were Republican. 5 of them.
I didn't know it was all 5. Okay.
Yeah, and I liked them. They were reasonable human beings. Did they always do everything I asked them to do? No. Did I do everything they asked me to do? No. You sort of drag your feet when you have to drag your feet, and you run when you have to run, when you get that opportunity. So it's going to be really hard. But this is what governance is like. But I think the swing is much larger than I'm probably articulating. It's going to be hard. But we're seeing similar things in so many other countries now. This big person profile and it's kind of on an international level, it's a little bit scary if globally we see this kind of shift.
Thinking a little bit more about what's happening domestically in the U.S. and just kind of how Trump's efforts, and congressional Republicans were important in kind of providing a backstop, but the Supreme Court provided a really important backstop in terms of protecting kind of key environmental laws. But the Supreme Court has changed a lot since kind of over the course of the first Trump administration. And I guess, it'd be helpful to hear you talk a little bit about how recent decisions by the court are likely to affect, efforts to roll back environmental policy. And I'm specifically thinking about the court's decision in June to undo the Chevron doctrine, which is so important to rulemaking. So maybe you could expand on that.
Well, Chevron doctrine has been around for so many decades that we EPA when I was there, and I'm sure folks continue, understand the need to sort of behave in a way that doesn't tempt the Supreme Court to do exactly what they did, which was to dismantle Chevron doctrine. And that doctrine really just said that, when EPA is making decisions and Congress hasn't weighed in on those, it has to be reasonable. But the way that it's been sort of tailored out is that, unless Congress acts and speaks to what they think is reasonable, then you can't do it, which is not the way Chevron doctrine works. It's the other way around. And it's made it, I think it sort of raises a lot more opportunities to challenge rulemaking that EPA would put out there. And I have no question that that's going to be, one of the challenges. And I think, Miranda knows Naomi Oreskes, right? Who's really a top-notch, I think she's actually a historian.
She is, historian of science.
She's great, yeah. And we've talked about this recently. And again, is that, they're trying to also suggest that all kinds of things need to be rolled back because we didn't know under the Clean Air Act, 1970 Clean Air Act, they're trying to suggest that nobody knew anything about climate change then. So that should be sort of rolled back. And I'm looking at it going, it's absolutely insane, the data that Naomi and others have sort of uncovered was how much discussion was actually had about climate during the development and passage of the 1970 Clean Air Act. So hopefully there'll be mechanisms to resolve this, but the Supreme Court right now is I just view them as being an enormous potential blockage of efforts, normal rulemaking efforts. And let's hope that that's not the case. But Chevron doctrine is a good sense that will be what folks try to do. And I love all the discussion that's ongoing about you need to add Supreme Court justices. Well, good luck to that. We can do that in one moment. I'll join.
So you brought up kind of the international
Yep.
scene and politics, and I guess I want to not so much focus on politics globally, but more thinking about energy and the clean energy transition globally. And I guess what should we make of China? Right? In some ways, right, the Inflation Reduction Act, a lot of the Biden kind of policy was about catching the U.S. up to China. I, among others, have been those who really argued that the U.S. needs policy and investments to catch up to China on the energy transition. And when you look around the world, I guess which are the countries that are setting the example that we should look to as a model? China is still the world's largest greenhouse gas emitter, but it's also this growing clean energy powerhouse. I guess, how should we think about how the U.S. is positioning itself kind of in this international political economy of an energy transition?
Well, I probably wouldn't start by looking to treat Canada as a state or Panama. I mean, that's probably what I wouldn't do. I mean, you raise a really good point, Jay, is that I'll be very honest. During the Biden administration, we actually had a pretty strong relationship with China when it came to climate. I spent a lot of time with leadership there and at the conferences of the parties and others. The challenge that we have with China is, you're absolutely right, they're very big on renewables. They have terrific electric vehicles. And the challenge that we've had of late is that China made significant investments in the global south, But they did it in a way that led to just huge debt on the part of countries that couldn't afford it. And so the challenge that we have is, what's the next relationship that we're going to have with China? I was just going to say China in a way that Trump does, but I won't do that. I'll be more mature. And so it's very difficult. The relationship with China has been more difficult under the Biden administration. Clearly, we are trying to build our own economy and rebuild it in a way that's stronger. Giving China a foothold in the U.S. on many of these technologies is not the path to actually make the United States stronger again. So I have no idea what the next administration is going to do in their relationship with China. If they're, trying to have tariffs on Canada, we're in a different universe than I ever lived in.
Maybe that gets me at kind of the last set of questions I wanted to turn to start to wrap things up, which is, thinking back to 2005, 2006, yourself, if you could look forward 20 or look back 20 years, what would be most surprising about what's happened in the last 2 decades in terms of climate and energy? And
that nobody fired me probably was one of the biggest surprises to me. I was never a shrinking violet, and I never asked permission before I did something. So those are all bad things when you're in government. They worked for me. I don't know. What do you think, Jay?
Yeah, and one thing you've emphasized, just how important the reframing of climate change, right? Not just about kind of
I think
physics
so too.
and the greenhouse gases, but as a social justice issue. That's been, I don't know, it's surprising but enormously important.
Yeah,
right?
it has.
Advances
Whether
in
that
clean energy
continues,
technology.
I think the thing that has, honestly, you just hit it, was in the end, how fast clean energy is moving was very surprising to me. How quickly. It shouldn't have been, because obviously I was involved in the Inflation Reduction Act, and that was exactly what we designed, but it worked. Yeah. That's what I think is going to be our saving grace from a climate perspective. But the thing that has disappointed me, honestly, is I was a very big and remain very active in clean air policy and work internationally. I do a lot of work now internationally on food systems and water systems. I'm just amazed that we have allowed the United States the luxury to not invest in the global South in the way that they deserve to be invested in. That's my biggest surprise, is that we couldn't figure out how to get around that. And it's, the climate world only wins if everybody's in it. To think that we could, spend a measly $1.1 billion on our international obligations on climate is an absolute disgrace. And that's, been the biggest disappointment for me, is that we couldn't have figured a damn way around that. We couldn't have muscled that more. I know people tried, including myself, but it just wouldn't go. And so that, to me, is the biggest challenge and the biggest opportunity this incoming administration has to screw things up on climate, is to continue to treat the global South in the same way that Congress has been treating it for a few years now. It's just disgraceful.
So one last question, because many students here today are keen to make a difference on addressing climate change, advancing environmental justice. Can you say a little bit more about your own career path and what advice you would offer to them, how you'd encourage them to get started?
Sure. I don't know whether, first of all, people should understand that I don't plan well. I never planned anything. It was like, oh, I want to be EPA. I didn't want to be EPA. Someone called me. A good friend of mine named Lisa Jackson said, do you want to be at EPA? When the Obama administration came in, she was the secretary of EPA, going in as secretary. And I was like, no, I don't think I want to do that. Unless you give me the air program. If you give me that one, I'll go. So I basically have never planned anything, and so I ended up going to UMass Boston, which was the best education I ever had. I loved it. I did all kinds I went for cultural anthropology because I love people. I thrive on it. This kind of dissension in politics makes all kinds of sense to me, and I love it. And what happened was I just ended up then going to Tufts and learning lots of stuff about what was going on in climate, and I ended up, getting a job as the first full-time Board of Health agent in the town of Canton, Massachusetts. Huge step up for me. And I had a blast. So, this was work that, I had to do water quality, solid waste systems, everything imaginable. And I ended up, actually pursuing some things through the courts, through EPA, DEP at the time. And I got myself in all kinds of trouble, and I loved it. And I ended up being asked to do more. I was so obnoxious at DEP for causing problems that they ended up asking me if I would go and be at at DEP, which I did. I ended up, being basically number 2 in Massachusetts. I was for the entire environmental affairs. And from there, I ended up, I don't know what the hell else I did, something else after that. But I just ended up, I just looked at opportunities. That's all I did. If an opportunity came my way, I didn't dismiss it. I looked at what it might be. And I ended up basically having an unbelievably fun career for a really long period of time. I went to Connecticut to be the DEP commissioner there, because in Massachusetts, you can't be commissioner of anything or secretary of anything unless you're political. And I wasn't political. I'm a policy person. And so I ended up saying, hey, Connecticut wants a new person. And it just so happened that the existing governor had been found corrupt and gone to jail. And the woman that was his second in command was a really nice, thoughtful human being who set up a really good process to ask people if they wanted to join. And I ended up getting that job. And then from Connecticut, I ended up going to EPA and at the air program, then EPA, administrator, I guess, at EPA. And so it just kind of happened.
So it sounds like to me, summing all of that up, don't plan too much, because you're going to be surprised in good ways and make a lot of good trouble along the way.
And always listen to those opportunities. Too many people feel like, well, I didn't get everything done I wanted to get done. Nobody ever does. I really think you need to be wide open to opportunities that come by, especially ones that you know nothing about. I never knew anything about a job that I took. I just knew that it was going to be really challenging, and if I could get through that, it would be so much fun. So it was just constant learning, and exposing yourself to potential failure, because not everything works out right. And there are some jobs that I took much more quickly than others because I got bored.
Gina, this has been great. We should wrap things up. So first, let me say thanks to our audience, including folks who joined us online. And second, thank you, Gina, very much for being here.
You're welcome.